Black Wing existed, and my job at the county library came with one rule: do not read the titles. My probation review hit at dawn, so I stayed on shift, even after the book cart handle started to tremble under my palms, cold and alive like a held breath. Books don't bite. Titles do. I learned that the moment I glanced up and the words on the nearest spine turned sharp in my head, and the custodian's voice beside me stopped being language. He talked anyway, lips moving, hands gesturing toward the restricted hallway, and all I caught was a wash of sound that slid off my brain like water off wax. The fluorescent lights over the stacks clicked once, then held perfectly steady, which mattered more than it should have. The shift binder sat on the circulation desk where my supervisor always left it, fat with old memos and thin with trust, and a white sticker on its spine said Rev W9 under a coffee ring that never dried. I had a habit from my first library job of checking the latch twice before opening anything important. So I double-tapped the binder clip, told myself to breathe, and opened to the page that everyone pretended did not exist. The rule sat in the middle of the paper in plain type, like it belonged anywhere. Do not read titles in the Black Wing. That line kept my eyes on the page, because reading the binder felt safer than reading a shelf, and I hated that my hands shook anyway. My mouth wanted to ask the custodian what he meant, wanted to say his name, wanted to make this normal, but the words that came out of him kept sliding into nonsense, so I swallowed my questions and grabbed my keys. The Black Wing door waded past reference, past the framed posters about community and quiet, past the row of security cameras that everyone forgot until a patron complained. The plaque on the door said, Black Wing, in raised letters, and the metal around the latch felt warmer than the hallway air when I touched it, like skin after exercise. The custodian pointed at the camera mounted above the door, then at the tablet on his cart, and his eyebrows lifted in the universal look that asked for an answer. I raised my badge to the reader, heard the beep hit slightly flat, and the latch opened anyway. Inside, the air smelled of toner and old glue, the kind of stale sweetness that clung to your shirt after a long shift in archives. The first shelf on the left held thin volumes with blank spines, and the second shelf held books with titles that wanted to be read, ink dark and crisp as new paint. My eyes caught one line without my permission, then my brain tried to say it the way it always did, silently, efficiently. The sound vanished from the room all at once. No hum from lights, no far-off air handler, no foot scuff from the custodian behind me. The quiet pressed against my ears so hard it forced a choice, and my old reflex kicked in before my judgment could catch up. So I turned my head toward the security camera in the corner to reassure myself somebody else could see this too. The monitor feed on my phone loaded with a familiar delay, then froze on a frame of the empty aisle. A shadow stood between shelves where nobody stood. My throat tightened, and I did the stupid thing people do when their mind refuses the first explanation. I blinked and refreshed the feed. The same frame returned, same shadow, same time in the corner of the display that matched the only time I had written down tonight, 11:26 p.m., and the second the image loaded, the custodian stepped forward beside me and said something that should have grounded me. His voice hit my ears, but the meaning never arrived. I backed out of the doorway, pulled it closed, and the latch clicked with the cleanest sound I had heard all night. Back at the desk, I tried the practical route, because that always worked at the library. I opened the catalog terminal and typed in my login, watched the cursor blink, and told myself the simplest answer stayed the likeliest. A security camera glitch, a network lag, a tired brain under cheap lights. The terminal printed a slip for a hold request without me touching the printer, the paper curling out with that dry, stubborn squeal, and the top line read, a title in block letters that I could not process. My eyes recognized letters, but the phrase refused to become meaning, and the harder I tried, the more it felt like my thoughts were rearranging themselves in my skull. The binder page turned under my fingers again, and another line sat 2 inches below the first, half hidden under a stain where coffee had bled through the paper fibers. If the printer outputs a title, shred it. My supervisor had always mocked that rule in a deadpan voice like it belonged to a safety video, then gone back to ignoring the black wing door. Now I reached for the shred bin under the desk, fed the slip into the teeth, and watched it disappear in strips, because fear makes obedience feel like competence. The custodian leaned over the counter, held up his tablet, and pointed at a typed message on the screen. His letters came through clean even when his voice did not. Blackwing opened itself. I stared at that sentence until my eyes watered because text on a screen stayed stable, and stability mattered more than comfort right then. My stress reflex hit again, so I tapped the desk edge with my knuckle twice, hard, the way I did before a hard conversation, and I typed back, "Not open." I opened. Camera shows shadow. The custodian read, then shook his head fast and sharp. He typed, "Camera loop, same frame 3 times." He held the tablet closer, and I saw the video thumbnails lined up like evidence in a trial, all stamped with the same frozen aisle. That matched what I had seen, which should have relieved me, but the match tightened the problem instead. A sick thought slid in, clean and unreasonable. If the camera looped, then someone wanted it to. The first selfish lie of my night sat behind all of this, heavy as an overdue fine. I had skipped the Blackwing reshelving round after closing last week because the donation carts never ended, because the new metrics in my evaluation tracked time in each section, because leaving one task unfinished never showed up if nobody complained. I had signed my name on the checklist anyway, and the shame of that lie burned hotter than the fear because my job trained me to believe in records. The custodian typed again, "Call supervisor." My phone sat in my pocket, and my supervisor's number sat in my recent calls. A simple action, a normal escalation. My thumb hovered, and I flinched when I realized the call button label looked wrong, the letters slightly off kilter, because my eyes kept wanting to do the thing the Blackwing had poisoned. I dialed anyway. The ringtone hit, and the voice on the other end answered, and I knew the pattern of the sound, knew it belonged to my supervisor, but every word landed like scrambled radio. I listened hard because I needed meaning, but my brain kept refusing the offer. Panic rose fast, and I almost lied again, almost pretended I could understand, but the custodian watched me with a look that demanded honesty. I held the phone out, let my supervisor talk into empty air, and shrugged. My supervisor snapped a phrase that I recognized only because it ended with my job title, and I caught enough to answer with one word. "No." Silence filled the line after that. Then my supervisor said something slower, careful, like speaking to a customer with a complaint. None of it landed. I felt my face heat, because getting blamed mattered even in a nightmare, and I typed a message instead. "Can't understand voice. Text only." A reply appeared in a bubble almost instantly. "Stop playing. Lock the wing. Wait." The message calmed me for half a second because it offered a plan, and plans are what librarians sell to chaos. The guilt came right behind it because my supervisor's first instinct stayed blame, not concern, and my stubborn part wanted to prove I had control. The shift binder offered more lines as I flipped. and my fingers snagged on a torn tab where a section divider should have been. A triangle notch scarred the paper, like someone had ripped the tab out clean and left the bite mark behind. I didn't notice it then because my mind stayed on survival, but my thumb rubbed that notch anyway, a tiny habit, and the texture stuck in my brain. Another rule sat on the next page, printed lighter, toner fading, and the corner held a small stamp that matched the binder sticker, Rev W9, as though this page had passed through an office that treated fear like paperwork. If a book faces outward, turn it inward. If the lights go quiet, close the door. The last line looked wrong because lights did not go quiet, but I didn't argue with it. I took my keys, walked back to the Blackwing door, and checked the latch, the way I always did, twice, slow and steady, the catchphrase I used when my thoughts tried to run away. The latch held. Then it clicked on its own, soft, polite like a book being closed. My skin prickled and I moved without thinking, pulling the door open just enough to see inside because my fear kept demanding proof. The aisle lay empty again, but the shelf ends held new paper tags that had not existed 5 minutes earlier, white rectangles fluttering slightly in air that should not move. Each tag held a title in black ink, and my eyes tried to read every single one. I yanked the door shut and slammed the lock because I understood at least this. The Blackwing wanted attention. The custodian grabbed my sleeve, pulled me back from the door, and said something urgent that I couldn't grasp. He pointed at the written note taped to the wall beside the door, a piece of scrap paper I had never noticed in months of walking past, and his finger shook like he hated touching it. The note sat under a strip of clear tape that had yellowed. Pencil scrawl ran across it, heavy pressure, like someone had written through anger. A smear cut through the first line where a hand had dragged across graphite. The paper held a faint smell of bleach, sharp and recent, which made no sense for an old warning. I leaned in, careful, keeping my eyes low, and read what the smear allowed. Read the titles to stay human. The words landed like a promise and a dare, and my desperate brain grabbed for it because it offered a fix. The custodian shook his head so hard his cap slipped, and he jabbed his finger under the smear, then drew an invisible line with his nail as though rewriting the missing part. His mouth formed a short shape, and I guessed the missing word from his frantic gesture. Don't. My stomach dropped, because the smear had erased the only part that mattered, and my eyes had filled it in with the worst option. I felt stupid, and the shame pushed me into action before panic could turn to freeze. I pulled out my phone, opened the Notes app, and wrote big. Smudged. Should be done. We cover titles. The custodian exhaled hard, relief in his face, then pointed at the tape. His nail picked at the edge, and the tape peeled with a slow, sticky sound that raised goosebumps on my arms. Under the tape, another line sat faint, pressed into the paper fibers like a bruise, the impression of a sentence that someone had erased and rewritten too many times. It said something different. If you can still read, do not prove it. The custodian stared at that line, then stared at me, and I felt the ground shift under every rule I'd ever trusted. I had two hypotheses, because that kept me from screaming. Either the library had installed some cruel training exercise, some compliance test built to scare night staff into obedience, and my supervisor stayed in on it. Or the Blackwing operated like a trap, a thing that fed on attention and used the institution's rules to lure the people most likely to follow them. I picked the first explanation because Human cruelty fit my job history better than monsters, and I ran a test. The security camera system stored clips locally on the office desktop, so I walked behind the desk, unlocked the drawer with the key I had checked out at the start of shift, and opened the office door. The carpet inside felt damp under my shoe, a subtle wrongness, and my pulse tripped over it. The desktop woke slow. The login screen asked for my password, then accepted it, then loaded the camera grid. Every feed showed the same frozen Blackwing aisle. The time in the corner stayed stuck, 11:26 p.m., and the cursor moved like nothing was wrong. I clicked the playback scrub bar, dragged it forward, watched the thumbnail change to a different frame for half a second, then snapped back to the same shadowed aisle, like the system refused to admit motion. I typed a message to my supervisor anyway because part of me still wanted an adult in charge. Cameras loop. Time stuck. I need help. The reply came back fast. Do not enter. Follow the binder. I read that line twice, then felt my face go cold because it matched the kind of order that kept liability clean and people disposable. The custodian stood in the doorway, watching my fingers hover over the keyboard, and his tablet buzzed with a new message. He showed me the screen. Back door unlocked. Alarm off. That sentence hit harder than the shadow. The back door stayed on an automatic lock schedule, and the alarm stayed on unless a supervisor disabled it remotely. That meant somebody had access, which meant my human explanation gained weight. But the fear did not shrink. My habit kicked in again. I checked the door log. The library used an access log that recorded every keycard door open in a plain table with time and door name. I pulled it up on the desktop. Entries scrolled down, neat, and my eyes tracked them without reading any words I didn't need. One line stood out because it showed my badge opening the Blackwing door 3 minutes ago. I hadn't been at the door 3 minutes ago. My mouth went dry, and my fingers hovered over the mouse, because I understood the danger in a way that made my chest hurt. Either the log lied or the building could use my identity against me, and both options spelled the same thing for my review at dawn. If I reported this wrong, my job ended. If I ignored it, something else opened. The custodian touched my elbow lightly, a grounding gesture, then typed on his tablet. Leave. Get out. I wanted to, and I hated that I wanted to, because leaving meant the Blackwing stayed uncontained, and my lie about the last week's round, stayed buried. My dad had texted earlier about his ride in the morning, asking if I could still make it, and I had answered yes because saying no felt like failing at being a son. Now my shift had become a trap, and the only way out demanded abandoning both duties at once. A soft sound drifted down the main aisle, a mechanical whir that didn't belong to any machine we owned. The book return slot by the entrance, the one that stayed locked after hours, opened and closed once like someone testing it. The custodian stiffened. His eyes flicked to the slot, then to the office, then to the Blackwing hall, and he made a slicing motion across his throat. Not violence, just urgency. Cut it. Stop it. End it. I moved on instinct, crossed to the return slot, and felt the metal flap vibrate under my fingertips. A tiny, rapid tremor like a trapped insect. My stress reflex hit, so I tapped the flap twice, then pulled it open. A single book lay inside, spine outward, waiting. The spine held no title, only a small printed sticker near the bottom, clean and new, marked W9 in plain black letters. The sticker made my stomach twist, because that code had lived on the binder, on the stamp, on the rules, and now it sat on a book that had entered through a locked slot without any human hands. My breath came shallow. Stupid, I told myself. Like so stupid. Yet my hands lifted the book anyway, because the rule in the binder had already trained me. If a book faced outward, turn it inward. I rotated it so the blank spine faced the slot wall, then forced myself to set it on the desk without looking at the cover. The custodian let out a sound that might have been relief, and I realized my body had learned fear faster than my mind. A new slip printed from the catalog terminal, slow and deliberate, and the paper squealed as it curled. I didn't let my eyes land on any letters. I grabbed it by the edge, fed it into the shred bin, and watched it vanish. The shred bin jammed. The motor whined, then stopped, and the room went quiet again. Deeper this time, like the building held its breath on purpose. The custodian waved his arms, trying to break my focus, because he could see the way my gaze drifted toward the printed strip stuck half in, half out, the temptation of readable text. My supervisor's phone call returned on its own, vibrating on my desk, even though I hadn't redialed. The screen flashed my supervisor's contact name, and the letters wobbled like they didn't want to stay still. I didn't answer because I couldn't risk another voice I couldn't understand, so I hit speaker and held the phone toward the custodian, hoping he could interpret. The voice poured out, sharp, urgent, and the custodian's face changed. He caught meaning where I caught noise, and his eyes widened in a look that made my stomach sink further. He snapped a short phrase back into the phone, under 12 words, clipped and clean. He's not pretending. He can't understand you. The supervisor barked something in reply. The custodian listened, then turned to me and typed fast. Supervisor says go Blackwing, checkbook count. My fingers froze above the keyboard. That order collided with the binder rule, and it landed like a test. My job told me to follow supervisors. My survival told me to follow the rules. My conscience told me the Blackwing fed on obedience. This became the choice that mattered, and no option stayed clean. If I refused, I defied my supervisor and failed my review. If I obeyed, I entered a place that had already started rewriting my brain. I typed back to the custodian. Can't read titles. Can't count. He stared at the message, then pointed at the shelves visible through the glass wall, by reference, the public stacks, the normal world. He mouthed a word slowly, and I guessed from his lips. Numbers. The binder held a page for inventory rounds with boxes and check marks. My lie last week had avoided those boxes. Now the system demanded them back, and my supervisor's order turned into a noose. My phone buzzed with a text. Final warning. Comply or badge lock. My pulse hit hard against my ribs because badge lock meant no job, no keys, no early ride for my dad, no health coverage, no paycheck. The terror shifted from supernatural to adult life in one breath, and that made it worse, not better. Okay, slow and steady. I typed a plan into the tablet because text stayed my only rope. I go. You stay at desk. Do not open door. The custodian's hand clenched on his cart handle, then loosened. He nodded once, then spoke a short line into the phone, aimed at the supervisor. He's going in. Don't do anything else. I took the office key, grabbed a roll of opaque book covers from the supply drawer, and walked toward the Blackwing door with my eyes down. Keep moving. The phrase that my mind used like a handrail. The hallway to the wing felt longer than it had 10 minutes ago, and the carpet underfoot changed texture halfway, from tight loop to something rougher, like a different building had started under my shoes. The lights overhead held steady, but the shadows under the shelving units sharpened into lines that looked too straight. I stopped before the door, held my badge to the reader, and heard the beep again, slightly flat. The latch did not open. The reader flashed red. Access denied. The back door unlocked itself and the alarm turned off. And my badge opened the door in the log without me. Yet the reader refused me in person. That contradiction hit like a logic bomb in my gut, and my hands went numb around the roll of covers. A faint scrape sounded behind the door, not a step, not a drag, more like paper being pulled from paper, slow and careful. My heart tried to climb into my throat. I backed away because leaving a door unopened sometimes counted as a win, but my phone buzzed again with another message from my supervisor. Use the emergency key, follow protocol. My supervisor knew about the emergency key. That key stayed in a sealed envelope under the desk, meant for fire and flood, not for inventory rounds. The custodian and I had never opened it in training because the idea of needing it felt too heavy for a quiet job. Now my supervisor asked for it like it belonged to routine. I walked back, grabbed the envelope, and the paper felt slick under my fingers like fresh wax. A red strip sealed it, and printed text warned about termination if broken. The custodian watched me, eyes locked on the seal, and he said one short line that cut through my panic, because meaning didn't matter for tone. Don't give them what they want. He pointed at the handwritten note we'd peeled, at the faint line pressed into the paper. If you can still read, do not prove it. My supervisor wanted me to prove compliance. The Black Wing wanted me to prove attention. Both traps pointed to the same act. I didn't have the luxury of a pure choice because someone had already opened the back door and the return slot had already delivered W-9 to my desk. The system moved whether I cooperated or not. So I broke a rule for the first time for the right reason. I wrote a message on the custodian's tablet, big and direct. You leave now. Call security. Do not come back. He stared at it, then shook his head because leaving felt like abandonment, and I understood that instinct too well. I typed again, softer. If they lock my badge, someone needs outside help. That landed. He nodded once, hard, and grabbed his keys. Then he stopped at the desk, reached under the binder, and pulled out a thin folder I hadn't seen, tucked behind the drawer rail like a secret. He slid it toward me, eyes wide, and tapped the corner where a sticker matched the binder stamp, Rev W9. Inside sat an older copy of the Black Wing rules, edges frayed, paper brittle, and the first page held a line I'd never seen. If speech breaks, do not seek speech. Below it, in lighter print, sat the trap, dressed like a comfort. Read one title aloud to reset. My stomach clenched because that rule sounded safe, helpful, even merciful, and it made perfect sense as a test. A desperate employee would take it, prove obedience, and feed the wing more deeply. The custodian pointed at that line, then pointed at his eyes, then pointed at the shred bin. Don't do it. Don't read. Don't trust any fix offered by text. He left through the staff entrance and the door clicked shut behind him. The security gates by the main doors stayed off. The building swallowed him without a sound. Alone at the desk, I stared at the sealed emergency key envelope until my vision blurred. Then I made the only move that kept my conscience intact. I broke the seal. The paper tore with a dry rip that sounded too loud in the quiet library. Inside, the emergency key lay taped to cardboard, and under it a small laminated card. New, unbent, like someone had prepared it just for this night. The corner held a stamp, Reverend 9, and the surface had a faint ripple, like cheap plastic, heated and cooled too many times. 3 short rules sat on the card in clean print. If you enter, cover every title. If you hear page turns, close the door. If you see yourself reading, do not look closer. I hated that my skin crawled at the 3rd line because it matched the exact fear that had been haunting the security feed. My hands shook and I fought the urge to run because running would only leave my lies and my duties behind. Okay, slow and steady. The emergency key turned in the black wing lock, and the door opened with a soft sigh. The air inside felt colder than the hallway, and the hairs on my arms lifted. I kept my gaze low, focused on carpet, on shelf bases, on anything that held no readable letters. The roll of opaque covers unspooled in my hands, thick paper that smelled faintly of starch and dust. I moved down the first aisle, covering spines by touch, smoothing paper over ridges, pressing edges down. My fingers found letters raised under fabric, and my gut tightened each time because even hidden words felt hungry. Halfway down, my shoe nudged something on the floor, and the object slid with a soft scrape. A book lay face down, cover turned to carpet, spine turned outward. The rule from the binder flashed in my mind. If a book faced outward, turn it inward. I didn't touch it yet. I crouched, kept my eyes on the floor, and reached for the book with 2 fingers, ready to rotate it without looking. The cover edge felt warmer than paper should feel, and that warmth traveled into my fingertips with a pulse. A sound came from deeper in the wing, and my stomach clenched. A single page turned, slow and deliberate, like someone taking their time. The sound shouldn't have existed because nobody else stood in the wing, because the cameras showed only shadows, because the custodian had left. Yet the page turn hit my ears with perfect clarity, and for 1 sharp second, my brain wanted to assign it meaning, wanted to imagine hands and eyes and text. The laminated card rule sat in my pocket, and my fingers found it without thought. If you hear page turns, close the door. Closing the door meant leaving the wing uncontained, leaving whatever had entered free to write itself through the building, leaving my supervisor's trap unanswered. Yet staying meant giving the sound what it wanted, attention, a moral choice, clean only in hindsight, ugly in real time. I backed up slow, holding my breath, keeping my eyes down, keep moving, and I walked out of the wing without covering the fallen book. My hand reached for the door, and the latch met my palm with a cold bite. The door did not swing shut. It stuck halfway like something blocked it, and my pulse spiked. I pushed harder, and the edge scraped against resistance that felt soft, like cloth, then snapped free. The door shut, and the lock clicked. Behind it, the page turned again. Back at the desk, my supervisor called. I didn't answer. I typed a message instead, fingers clumsy. Emergency key used. Heard page turns, closed door. The reply arrived. Open it. You must finish covering. A familiar surge of shame rose, the fear of being blamed for an incomplete job, and I almost obeyed, because my whole adult life had been built around finishing tasks, even when finishing hurt. Then I remembered the trap rule on the old sheet. Read 1 title aloud to reset. That line had not been written for safety. It had been written for compliance. So I chose the other hypothesis, the one that made my skin crawl. The system wanted obedience more than it wanted containment, and the Black Wing used that. I ran a test that could prove both wrong. The library had a dumb little sound recorder we used for oral history events, a handheld device with a red button and a tiny screen. I grabbed it from the supply closet, held it up near the Black Wing door, and hit record, because sound stayed the one sense my brain still trusted. Then I opened the office desktop again and pulled the access log. My badge entry still sat there. Impossible. Stamped at 11:26 p.m., like a bruise that never faded. I took a photo of it with my phone because evidence mattered, and my hands shook so hard the picture blurred. The door behind me clicked. I spun because the sound meant action and saw the back door in the staff hallway standing open, a dark wedge of exit that should have been sealed. The alarm panel by the desk stayed dark. My chest tightened and the reality of a human intruder returned, sharp and immediate. Footsteps crossed the lobby tile, soft, measured, not the stumble of a drunk patron, not the shuffle of a tired co-worker. The sound came from the direction of the Blackwing corridor, and the cadence matched the page-turn rhythm. One step, pause, one step, pause, like someone moving between shelves. I didn't have chase in me, I had procedure. I locked the main doors with the override under the desk, knowing that would flag my record later, knowing my supervisor would see it and write me up. And I did it anyway because leaving an open building felt worse than losing my job. The lock bolt slid with a heavy thunk, and the sound broke the rhythm in the hall. The footsteps stopped. The silence that followed felt engineered, not natural, and it forced my next decision. I turned off the desk lamp because light drew attention, and I crouched behind the circulation counter with the recorder still running, eyes on the floor, ears straining. A whisper of sound drifted from the Blackwing door area like paper brushing paper. Then a short, quiet laugh that had the shape of human voice without the warmth. My skin crawled. The recorder screen glowed faintly. I wanted to look at it, to confirm it captured something, to reassure myself with tech. That urge matched the Blackwing hunger too closely, so I slid the device into a drawer without checking. The door to the Blackwing opened. I couldn't see it from my angle, but I heard the latch, heard the soft friction of a door swinging, and the hairs on my arms rose. A second set of footsteps joined the first, then merged, then became one, like the building consolidated its movement into a single decision. My phone buzzed with a new text from my supervisor. "Why are doors locked?" The anger in that line landed even through text, and I felt my shame spike. Fear of being blamed, fear of losing everything over a night nobody would believe. That emotion pushed action, so I typed fast. "Back door open. Someone inside. Need security now." The reply came. "Do not contact anyone. This is internal." Internal. That word hit like a slap because it turned my supervisor from help into threat. The institution cared about itself first. Always. And I had been naive enough to think rules existed to protect staff. The footsteps reached the lobby. A figure moved past the glass doors at the entrance, outlined by the dim street light outside, and the shape held the proportions of a person but moved wrong. Too smooth, like a camera clip playing at the wrong frame rate. My eyes wanted to chase it. My brain wanted to label it. I kept my gaze down. From that angle, I saw only shoes, and the shoes wore no tread, no scuff, smooth soles like new plastic. They stopped at the circulation desk. Paper slid across the counter. A sheet landed with a soft slap, and the sound made my gut twist, because it sounded like a memo being delivered. The sheet lay where I couldn't see the text without lifting my head. I didn't lift my head. Instead, I reached up with one hand, felt for the edge of the paper, and dragged it down into my space without looking. My fingers trembled on it. The paper felt warm, like it had been pressed under a palm. I pulled my phone out, opened the camera app, and used the screen as a mirror, aiming the lens at the page so I could see it reflected without directly reading. That counted as cowardice and competence in equal measure, and I hated myself for how clever it felt. The reflected image showed a printed instruction, crisp and official. The corner held the Rev W9 stamp again, and the first line said, "Confirm containment by reading 3 titles." The second line said, If you comply, speech returns. The third line said, if you refuse, access revokes. A trap rule dressed in kindness, hooked into my deepest fear, offered by the system that controlled my paycheck and my badge. I stared at it in the phone screen until my vision swam and my mind tried to bargain. I could read 3 titles. I could get my comprehension back. I could call for help out loud, explain to the custodian, explain to security, explain to my supervisor. I could fix this. The phrase from the handwritten note pressed into my brain again. If you can still read, do not prove it. That note hadn't been official. It had been written by someone who survived. I set the phone down, slid the paper into the shred bin without looking at it directly, and hit the button. The bin roared to life, chewed the page clean, and didn't jam this time. A soft sound came from above the desk, near the security camera, a click, like a lens adjusting. Then the camera made a tiny chirp, the kind it never made, and the feed on my phone flashed a new frame without me touching it. My own face filled the screen. I stood in the Blackwing aisle, head tilted, eyes fixed on a spine, mouth open in the shape of reading aloud. My hands held a book cover roll like a leash. I didn't look closer. I slammed the phone face down on the carpet because images could function like titles, and I couldn't risk my brain taking that path. The moment I did, the world shifted again. The hum of the fluorescent lights returned with a harsh buzz, and the sudden noise made me flinch. The normal sounds of the building snapping back felt wrong, like a mask being put on. My supervisor texted again. Comply. This goes away. The message held an authority I had obeyed for months, and my shame tried to push me into proving myself again. The guilt spiked too, because I had sent the custodian away, alone into the night. And if he called security and my supervisor punished him, that would be on me. I needed an act that left the world safer, even if it left me broken. The old folder the custodian found had a back page full of tiny notes in different handwriting, layered over each other, like staff had used it as a confession booth. I flipped to it, careful, and found one line that sat darker than the rest. Cover the stamp, not the titles? That sounded impossible, but it matched the Rev W9 sticker on the binder, the stamp on the cards, the code on the book in the return slot. The system signature, the anchor, the key. I pulled the binder toward me, fingers shaking, and found the white Rev W9 sticker. Under it, the coffee ring stain had eaten into the glue, and the sticker edge lifted slightly, like it wanted to move. The triangle notch scar from the missing tab matched the sticker corner shape, and my thumb rubbed it again, recognizing the texture. I grabbed a black marker from the supplies drawer, the kind we use to cover outdated barcodes, and I pressed the tip to the sticker. The ink smelled sharp, chemical, and my hand hesitated because defacing official material felt like a crime in a place built on order. Then I remembered my supervisor's word, internal. I blacked out the Rev W9 sticker until the letters vanished under dark ink. The lights above the desk flickered once, fast. The security camera chirped again. From the Blackwing hall, a sound like a held breath released. Then the page turn rhythm stopped mid-motion, as though someone had lost their hands. Relief. Hit hard. Concrete. Like stepping onto solid ground after a stumble. The buzzing in my ears eased. For half a second, I almost believed the problem had ended. A new page printed from the catalog terminal. The paper slid out slow, curling, and my stomach sank before I could stop it. Because the printer had stayed quiet for 10 minutes, and quiet never meant safe anymore. I didn't look at the text. I grabbed it by the blank edge and held it up toward the desk lamp. The paper had no ink. It held only a faint embossed impression, pressed into the fibers, the same triangle notch shape as the missing binder tab, stamped over and over like a watermark. The false resolution broke under that detail because it told me the system had moved beyond ink and letters. It had learned to write without writing. My phone buzzed again, but this time the message didn't come from my supervisor. The sender line read unknown, and the preview held one short sentence. Eyes down. Keep moving. Seeing my own echo phrase on a screen made my blood run cold because I'd never typed it anywhere. I had only thought it, only used it inside my head to stay steady, and the building had picked it up like a borrowed book. The recorder in the drawer started playing back on its own. A voice poured out, clear, human, and my heart leapt because comprehension returned in a rush. For one beautiful second, I understood words again. Then the voice on the recorder said, in my own exact tone, reading aloud, "Confirm containment by reading 3 titles." My breath hitched. The trap rule hadn't come from my supervisor. It had come from me or from something wearing my voice, and the realization twisted my stomach. I yanked the drawer open, grabbed the recorder, and hit stop. My finger shook so hard I almost dropped it. The screen displayed a waveform, jagged and busy, and beneath it, the file name in plain letters. W9. That code had reached into my tools now, and I understood the larger threat in a way that made my skin go numb. This wasn't just a cursed aisle. This was a process that used evidence, used compliance, used record-keeping itself to spread. My supervisor's number called again, and this time I answered because I needed to know whether the human authority remained real or just another medium. The voice hit my ear and meaning returned, but it came with a cost. Every word sounded slightly rehearsed, too clean, like a script read by someone who didn't care. "Unlock the doors," my supervisor said. "Stop escalating." I swallowed because the urge to argue rose hot, and I didn't trust my own voice. Back door opened itself. A pause, then a careful, flat reply. "No, you opened it." My hands went cold. "I have a photo of the log." "Then delete it," my supervisor said too fast. "This stays internal." The lie landed clean, and my guilt snapped into anger because my supervisor cared more about the institution's shame than my safety. The adult pressure line hit hard, practical. If I let this disappear, I kept my job and my paycheck. If I refused, my badge locked, my review failed, and my dad lost his ride in the morning. I chose the responsible repair anyway because my earlier lie had started this, and the only way out required truth. "I already sent it," I said, and that wasn't entirely true yet, but the commitment mattered. "To the public records mailbox." My supervisor inhaled sharp, and the sound carried a tiny page turn under it, faint, almost hidden. "You can't." "I can," I said, and my voice shook. "Stop me." The line went dead. The lights in the lobby cut out. Emergency strips glowed along the floor, thin and cold, and the sudden dark forced me to move by touch. I felt my way to the desk, found the office desktop, and the screen still glowed, right and wrong in the blackout. The camera grid showed motion now, smooth and steady. A figure walked down the Blackwing aisle, head tilted, eyes fixed on a spine. The figure wore my clothes. Tier 3 clarity hit fast, because the camera exposure didn't blur the face this time. The face looked like mine in a mirror held too close, pores too detailed, eyes too flat. The mouth moved without breath, shaping words. I didn't look closer. Instead, I acted on the residue plan. I plugged a thumb drive into the desktop, copied the access log photo, copied the camera clip file without watching it, copied the recorder audio, and I wrote a single sentence in a plain text document because I needed a warning that didn't depend on titles. Do not read The Blackwing. The letters looked stable. That felt like a gift. I saved the folder under the only name the system had already chosen, because fighting the code felt pointless. W9. Then I emailed the folder to the county's open records address, the one used for meeting minutes and budget requests, because bureaucracy had created a path that even supervisors couldn't fully erase. My finger hovered over send. My shame spiked. Fear of being blamed. Fear of losing everything. And I hit send anyway. The sent message vanished from my outbox the moment it left. The printer spit out a blank page again, embossed with the triangle notch shape. Somewhere in the stacks, the book return slot opened and closed once, slow, satisfied. I grabbed the black marker again and went back to the binder, because the stamp had moved once, and it could move again. The Rev W9 sticker under my ink had slid half an inch to the right, like a living thing adjusting itself, and the edge lifted toward my palm. The wrongness in that tiny movement almost broke me, because it proved the system didn't need permission to rewrite anything even after I defaced it. The only thing I could do was keep covering, keep blinding, keep refusing. Outside, headlights flashed through the glass doors. The custodian's car pulled up crooked and a security vehicle rolled in behind it, yellow lights strobing silently in the dark. The relief made my knees weak, and I almost laughed. Then the back door swung open again, slow, inviting, and the security vehicle's driver stepped out and walked straight toward it, without looking at the main entrance, like someone had already told him where to go. The custodian shouted from across the lot, one short line that cut through glass. "Don't read anything." I understood him. His words landed clean. That meant the Black Wing had loosened its grip on my comprehension, at least enough to hear a warning, and the gratitude hit hard enough to sting. I sprinted to the main doors, fumbled the lock override, and shoved them open, waving the custodian inside. My hands shook so badly I dropped the keys once, and the metal clattered on tile too loud. The custodian grabbed them, shoved them back into my palm, and his eyes flicked toward the back hall. The security driver had already crossed the threshold. I didn't have time for speeches. I had one more choice. The binder page for the emergency key envelope sat open on the desk, and the laminated card slipped out onto the floor face up. The card's last line stared back in clean print, a line I hadn't noticed earlier because fear had narrowed my focus. "If you warn anyone, replace the card." That explained everything. The rules weren't just traps. They were self-healing. The institution had built a system that punished warning by rewriting the warning medium itself. I grabbed the card, snapped it in half, and the plastic cracked with a sharp pop that felt like breaking a bone. The custodian flinched, then nodded because destruction sometimes stayed the only honest containment. The library lights surged back on. The security driver yelled from the back hall, his voice muffled by distance, but I caught the words anyway. "Hey, who wrote this?" He held a sheet of paper up, and even from far away, I saw the corner stamp, Rev W9, because the stamp had become the only consistent thing in this building besides my guilt. I ran toward him, because leaving him alone with readable text would feed the wing. And my pro-social rule brake landed again, driven by duty, not bravery. The hallway carpet shifted under my feet, rougher, longer, and my lungs burned. The security driver turned the paper toward me, wanting validation, wanting a partner in comprehension. I kept my eyes down. "Keep moving." And I slapped the paper out of his hand without reading it, because friendship didn't matter more than survival. The paper fluttered to the floor, and the letters on it crawled. the ink strokes writhing into new shapes, like ants in a line. The driver swore a short, sharp curse, then looked at me with the same confusion the custodian had shown earlier. "What is wrong with you?" My throat tightened because that question cut deeper than fear. "I can explain, just don't read." He frowned. "Don't read what?" The floor between us vibrated, a low hum building under our shoes, and the back door latch clicked, then clicked again, then clicked a third time, like a machine trying to decide which world to choose. The custodian stood behind me, breathing hard, and held up his tablet with a typed message, because text still mattered when voices failed. "Back out. Seal door." The security driver stared at the tablet, then at the paper on the floor, then at the back door, and his mouth twisted with the human impulse to prove control. He bent, eyes on the paper, and I saw his gaze catch a line. I couldn't stop him fast enough. His face went blank. Not vacant. More like his mind had slipped a gear. He blinked slow, then opened his mouth and spoke, and the words came out fluent, calm, wrong. Confirm containment by reading 3 titles. The trap rule had moved into his mouth now, and the horror tied itself to the flaw that every working adult carries. Denial. The need to obey the instruction that sounds official. The custodian grabbed the driver's arm and yanked him back hard, and the driver stumbled, startled. Human again for a second. That gave me the window I needed, so I slammed the back door shut and shoved the deadbolt, hands shaking, body moving on muscle memory. The deadbolt refused to slide. A soft scraping came from the other side of the door, like paper being folded. I pressed my palm against the metal, felt warmth under it again, and forced my weight into the bolt until it clicked into place with a final satisfying thunk. The action cost something. The bolt handle bit into my skin hard enough to bruise, and the pain grounded me in a way fear couldn't. The building exhaled. The security driver blinked again, then swore, real this time. What did I just say? The custodian spoke fast. One short line, urgent. "Don't trust rules here." The driver stared at us, then at the desk at the end of the hall, then at the black wing door. "This some kind of prank?" "Maybe," I said, because theory bait mattered for survival. Or a cover-up. A faint page turn sounded behind the sealed back door, and the driver stiffened. Or something else. We had 3 adults in a hall with a locked door and a system that rewrote itself. No clean ending fit. Only damage control. I led them back to the circulation desk, kept my eyes on the floor, and pulled out a notebook, the blank kind we used for supply orders. Blank pages stayed safer, but even blank pages had become suspect, so I wrote only one thing in big plain letters because I needed the warning to exist somewhere physical. "Do not read." The custodian nodded, and the driver swallowed hard because the rule sounded stupid until it stopped sounding stupid. I tore out the page, taped it over the black wing plaque without covering the raised letters, then taped another over the return slot flap because those 2 entry points had become mouths. The driver asked, low, shaken, "Who made this?" My hands trembled. "The same people who told me it was internal." The custodian pointed at the binder, at the missing tab scar, at the sticker I'd blacked out. He typed on his tablet, "Stamp moves, sticker moves, rules heal." The driver looked like he wanted to argue, but the back door latch clicked once, soft, and his face drained of color. In the last quiet stretch before dawn, we didn't fight monsters. We did what working people always do in a broken system. We documented, we sealed what we could, and we warned whoever might replace us. The custodian left a copy of my warning on the security driver's dashboard. The driver photographed the binder pages without looking at titles because he learned fast. I emailed the evidence folder again from my phone using cellular data outside the building, and this time the sent message didn't vanish. It only moved into a folder I'd never used before. A place labeled with a familiar code, W9, like the system wanted me to know it had received my confession. Near the end, I found a second binder under the desk. Thinner, newer, stamped with a department name I didn't recognize. And inside it, the same triangle notch impression pressed into paper fibers, like a watermark spreading across a quiet county. The last note I taped to the black wing door used the only phrasing that felt honest, printed in my shaky hand, and it ended with a line someone had written before me in small, neat letters. If you've seen that symbol before, don't ignore it. I keep asking myself why my supervisor's voice carried page turns under the words, and why the access log blamed my badge for doors I never touched. Because the worst part isn't losing comprehension. The worst part is realizing the rules didn't fail tonight. They performed exactly as designed.